Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 122. And my guest in this episode is Catie Cullen. And Catie is the founder and president of Satsuma Fine Art, which is an art consulting firm based in Fairhope, Alabama. And Catie, in this Satsuma project business of hers, she assists private clients and businesses alike to build meaningful, impactful, and expertly curated art collections. And I was happy and grateful to have Catie on as a guest to help me move from sort of uninformed but intuitive appreciation of art. And I was able to ask her some questions about art and aesthetics that helped open me up a little bit. So I appreciate that. I very much enjoyed my conversation with her. And I hope you enjoy the conversation as well. I will have as with all of my guests, I'll have information in the contact field to learn more about Catie and the work that Catie does. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Catie Cullen to the IdeaCast interview series. This will be not quite a first for me of sorts. I've had other artists on, but Catie, you have a strong academic background in art. I want to talk about art history with you. I knew nothing until you sent me over a wonderful Word document with all these wonderful bullet points. It sent me down rabbit holes. So thank you for that, because I'll try to hold on to everything that I learned and incorporate it into how I see things. But welcome to you. I'm so glad to have you on for a conversation today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to dive
Yeah,
in.
yeah. I think it'll be fun. Because we can kind of geek out together, you being the authority
hmm
on what we're going to be, but I'll be just the eager student as well. I believe the audience will just wick this up and have a good experience with it. And to the audience, welcome. So glad to have you all here,
No.
especially my subscribers. Thank you for hanging in there and being my subscribers. I appreciate that. All right, so I think before we hit record, I said, let's do something, let's configure a little differently here today. Let's talk about where you are presently, your enterprise that you're working with, and it is bearing the fruits of your efforts academically, so to speak. And there's a pun in there that people will catch on in just a second. So tell us about Satsuma, if you would mind.
Sure. So at the beginning of this year, I launched an art consultancy here in Lower Alabama called Satsuma Fine Art. And basically, we work with clients and both private collectors and businesses to help them build out their art collections. I had worked at another firm that did something similar in Boston for a period of time. And when I moved to this area, I wanted to find somewhere to get involved in that niche in the art world again. And it just there wasn't really a competitor in this space.
Okay.
So I decided to get going, and the name Satsuma actually came from, of course, down here in the South we have delicious Satsuma trees everywhere. I wanted something that felt
Mhm.
local, but also had a little je ne sais quoi for people outside of the region.
Yeah.
And orange has always been my favorite color. I have orange all over my house, orange throw blankets and pillows. So
Okay.
it feels like a very full circle to now have a reason to put orange, slap orange on everything.
Mm.
That's for that. But that's been a really great experience working with private collectors in the area here, primarily at this point,
Okay.
and helping them find artworks that they love, and getting to think about how do people connect with art, how do I find the right piece for the right person? And it's kind of a fun puzzle to work through every day with all the art that's out there in the world.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And you're near Mobile and you're also near Pensacola, but is Pensacola a little bit of a stretch for you to practically engage with that market, or are you comfortably
No,
situated
not
that you could?
yeah, not too far from Pensacola. I'm here in Fairhope, Alabama, so we're right south of Mobile on the coast, and we're about 45 minutes from Pensacola. So it's an
Oh,
easy
okay.
trip over and back. There's earlier this week, I actually was discussing maybe going and grabbing lunch in Pensacola this afternoon with a friend. So it's
Not
really
that
not too
far.
hard to pop over and pop back. Yeah, and it's a
Okay.
nice drive. hmm
Okay. Yeah. And Fairhope, what river is that on? I'm sorry. My
So we're
geography.
on Mobile Bay,
Bay.
and
Okay.
then there's a couple of rivers, but primarily the bay is the
Okay.
main
So,
water. hmm
okay. Um, and it's funny you said Lower Alabama, because I know people in my horticultural world that will be
hmm
from North Florida, like Tallahassee to Pensacola, and they'll say, "Yeah, we're in
hmm
LA." And I'm like,
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, Lower Alabama. So they actually co-opted that too because it's such a
Yeah.
thin little insignificant sliver of Florida. Apologies to anybody
Hmm.
that lives up there, but yeah, they basically call themselves Lower Alabama as well. But they
Yeah.
throw around LA like it's flashy.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
anyway, sorry, tangent. All right, so Satsuma is emerging. It's new. It's built on a history of your again both practical and academic background. Uh, is there a growth vision for you in that, or and are you what are you visioning for your baby, your new
Yeah.
entity that you've created?
I'm thinking, I'm just thinking about, I've worked in, like I said, I've worked in art consultancies before. I've worked in the gallery world for a while, and I'm excited to just, I think that this is where I'm going to put down roots. I've
Hmm.
been all over. I lived in Boston, New Orleans, now here in Alabama. I think this is where I'm going to settle down and stay. So
Hmm.
I'm just kind of excited to become integrated in the community here, and I think over time expand to serving clientele across the Gulf South, or the Gulf Coast, I should say, from Louisiana to Florida, and eventually even expand further,
Okay.
if possible. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. I just love the relationships that I've been able to build so far, and I'm excited to continue to meet more people who love art, who want to invest in the cultural fabric of their areas, or to leave a lasting legacy with the artworks that they collect, and
Mm.
um, have kind of support artists and support the broader artistic scene in this area, of the country, I guess.
Okay. And I would intuit, and you can correct me, that you are not necessarily location dependent, that thanks to the internet and accessibility that we have through that, that you can have a footprint or a presence there too as well, or can you function? So in other words, if there's somebody in, Des Moines, Iowa or somewhere like that that takes an
Mhm.
it to find Satsuma, and can you work remotely with people, or is it more that you have to be there as a consultant to facilitate that, service that you provide?
Yeah, so for people that are local, I love to go in person and see the space where they want to put the art, but um, it's definitely something where we can work remotely. I,
Okay.
can review architectural plans and photos and elevations of walls to get a sense of,
Okay.
a space without being there in person. So it's definitely something where I can work remotely. I have a project possibly coming in from Philadelphia in the coming weeks. So,
Okay.
and we've been working online together. I haven't been up, that's my hometown, but I haven't been back up that way in a minute.
Oh,
So
okay. In a minute. I
it's
love
definitely
that.
it's definitely something we can do remotely and meet with
Yeah.
folks online virtually like we're doing right now.
Hmm.
And as long as I can get a sense of the space, usually through architectural renderings,
Yeah.
then I can think about how art will interact with that space, and how it will, what experience a viewer would have in that space, and
Right.
kind of reconstruct it backwards or
Okay.
reverse engineer it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I got to thinking about augmented reality when you were talking about this, what you were
Hmm.
just saying, that could be a means to help people imagine an object of art or a piece of art in their dwelling, in their home or whatever, and that you could perhaps use that technology. Is that something that people are working with in your
Yeah.
in your wherever bracket, yeah, of the
Yeah.
yeah? Is that something
Yeah.
that's being tried?
Yeah, so definitely, when you go on a lot of galleries and other websites now will have, a try this artwork in your space, and it will use
Right.
AR to put it
Okay.
on your wall. But then you also have a lot of artists who are incorporating elements of augmented reality into things like murals or artworks, where if you lift your phone, it kind of transforms the experience in a new way,
Okay.
as you interact with the art. A good muralist friend of mine, Banks Compton, just did a couple pieces in Huntsville where that was incorporated, for a rocket tech company,
Oh,
and you could hold up your phone and it would be like you were in space. The objects that were painted onto the wall could move and interact
okay.
with you as you moved through the space. So there's a lot of cool ways that technology is kind of transforming how we can present art to people,
Hmm.
both from a sales perspective, but also from an experience perspective, actually living with that art and seeing it every day, whether in your there it was in an office, but even in your home.
Yeah.
So
Good to
yeah.
know. Good to know. I asked partly because I've seen interior design and furniture companies using that and said, well, here, we're going to virtually place this in your living room and
Yeah.
you sit with it for a little bit, see what you think. So I could see that translating over to art as well and objects. And you had mentioned a space center, and so you do both public and private work, right? You'll work with institutions as well as private collectors.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything from healthcare, bringing art into either patient rooms or lobbies, corporate offices, what else? Hospitality and hotels,
Okay.
any kind of space where people need art, or, if you got blank walls, that's something we can work with and try to get something really special there.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And mentioning hospitals and healthcare, I think we had that on the document that you sent over to me, and it just makes so much sense that that's part of the healing and recuperative process is that you have an aesthetic environment or a pleasing aesthetic environment that can help
Mhm.
people feel better. Yeah.
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 Yeah,
So
there's been
that's
a couple different studies about that, like that experience in hospital settings, and a lot of it what they've found too is that a lot of it is about, this concept of biophilia, that humans are drawn to nature and natural settings, and that it can provide a lot of peace and calm, colors like blues and greens. And they, so thinking about how that can be incorporated in a healing environment and bring peace or hope, or, just draw on that natural human connection to the natural world. Um, that's something that definitely is I've seen is really important today as people build new hospitals and rethink about the spaces that they have in hospitals and how it can promote healing.
hmm It just strikes, it seems intuitive that's natural complementarity to the so-called allopathic or allopathic systems, of medicine and surgery
Hmm.
and interventions that go on, that you have that
Yeah.
environment for someone. Yeah. I almost think
Hmm.
food could be a good thing too. Yeah, they haven't caught on to
Yeah.
that one yet. It's still
Yeah.
hospital food.
Yeah.
I say that because my wife went in a few years ago, and it was decent, it wasn't bad. But I'm just trying to think, like, if you could open up that dimension for people,
Hmm.
and tap into what they like, and be careful because they're in a situation where they may imprint that, I ate my favorite food at the hospital, now I hate it. But find that space where it's like more basic components of culinary that they could enjoy that dining
Yeah.
experience while they're convalescing or rehabilitating. So. It
Yeah.
could be complementary again to
Yeah.
to the overall aesthetic experience and environment
Absolutely.
while one is healing. So yeah, here's to that in the future. But at least you're working and
Yes,
making
definitely.
inroads with that idea, the biophilia, and that art is part of that journey and that recuperation.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been really great, and I've worked in a couple different projects with hospitals both in the US and abroad, and it's just really thinking about even the common spaces where people are waiting, both for the patients, themselves. Sorry, my cat is trying to get in, and I'm sorry if she gets noisy during this,
It's
but
okay. Cats are welcome on the
um,
show. So,
good, great.
yeah.
But thinking about both, the patient experience and their healing, but also how is the visitor experience for someone that's
Mm,
there attending to their loved ones, or, even the doctors and nurses that
yeah.
are there every day, and that's their environment where they work. Thinking about how, you know, art and, their environment plays a role in how they feel and how they can do their work, how they can support their loved ones. So, yeah, I think it's a really important kind of component to think about when you're thinking about that sort of space.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So many people benefiting from such a conceptually simple, you hang things that are beautiful and or display things that are beautiful, and the payoff is it's multi-aspectual. There's multiple, like you said, multiple players involved in that environment that
Hmm.
can benefit from that, especially, yeah, like you said, people that work long shifts, and in fact
Hmm.
that might even speak to the idea of kind of rotation for them. Maybe
Yeah.
every 6 weeks you rotate things out. And are there people that do that?
Yeah.
Are they people that sort of I know people who do this with plants. Again, I love horticulture, but they go in with orchids or
Hmm.
succulents and rotate things out of commercial spaces and things. I won't ask that about you directly, but is that something that is in that industry that there is leased art that can, rather than selling somebody a piece, that they rotate things out, or is that not feasible?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we'll get that as far as staging, where
Hmm.
art will go in just for a period of time for photography, or
Okay.
kind of to stage a place. And then in hospital setting, I haven't been in a situation where they're looking to rotate that art all the time. I think it's
Okay.
just probably a time
Yeah.
constraint thing. But
Yeah.
definitely sometimes you'll see like a special installation of here's some artworks from local students, or here's some artworks from. So you'll see things like that where that's more of a um, limited time. Come see these pieces, and then
Okay.
before they go. So yeah, that's
Okay.
more of what we see.
Okay. And then another question kind of related to Satsuma and where you are, where you're located. Do you have opportunities to either do sort of freelance or volunteer docent work with the regional museums or 501(c)s that are doing things related to art? Do you see opportunities for that in your community?
Yeah, I do volunteer at Alabama Contemporary, which is in Mobile. They're about to go through a major shift, just because they're going to renovate their space, but they get some terrific exhibitions. Their curatorial team is really special. And a lot of times I'll go to support them during they do art walks the second Friday of every month in Mobile,
Okay.
and you get a lot more foot traffic. So I'll usually be there to help people, guide people through the space, just kind of support the staff there when I can. I think they have a really special vision and get in a lot of really great art. So I always love popping over there when I can for art walks.
Oh, that's neat. That's really cool. It's so
Yeah.
satisfying too. I try to do uh, assistance and curation in the botanical gardens. There's one
Hmm.
bona fide garden in my area that's staffed, and there's another one that's a botanical garden, but it's barely maintained. And so I
Hmm.
between the two cities that I live in, I go up there and I try to put time in and mostly do species enrichment. Like the one garden to the north of me, I've put in over 167 species of plants and
Yeah.
palms and things like that, just because that's who I am.
Hmm.
So anyway,
I
and
love that.
I actually had their permission to do it too. So that's the nice thing.
That's
Because my
always nice.
yeah, I have a friend who's a fellow plant nerd, and we do gorilla planting too, which I shouldn't talk about a lot. But they show up in like gas stations and common areas of places where it's not gonna.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful thing that you're growing, so it's not like it's graffiti or anything. But you just sort of surreptitiously install something and see if it gets chopped down, or if it
Yeah.
gets to grow up to be an adult, and then you can point and say, ah, yeah, I planted that 15 years ago, and it's there doing its thing. So,
That's so cool. I have
yeah,
never heard about that gorilla planting. I love that
yeah.
concept.
We're audacious too. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm not committing any felonies or anything, but I'll just go up to a convenience. There's chain convenience stores, and a lot of times they'll have retention pond areas and common area that's just never used or never paid attention to. I'll just plant tons of stuff in there, and if the maintenance crews don't just inadvertently, butcher it, that it will have a chance. A
Hmm.
friend of mine in Tampa planted a series of palms on a DOT space in a common section or
Okay.
a road section, and unfortunately they made it a few months, and then the whoever was maintaining it decided to be officious and bureaucratic, and this isn't on our so they took them out. My friend was so disappointed. I was like, you got to be really you have to walk that line and be clandestine. That's why it's guerrilla planning. You can't
Hmm.
be that overt with it. Sometimes you can get away maybe, but I tend to camouflage things and hide them so that they have the best chance to get out. But anyway, it's all
Yeah.
for the
To grow.
beautification. Yeah, exactly. It's all for the
Yeah.
beautification of the common areas in our in our society. So that's
Yeah, absolutely.
enough of me talking about plants. We're here for you. So, but I just thought I'd insert that because it's
I
all in
think
the
there's a
name of
lot of
aesthetic.
I
Yeah.
do. I think there's a lot of overlap there. You know, finding places. I think just, humans are drawn to beauty and creativity is just such a uniquely human and maybe people would disagree with that, but I feel that creativity is such a uniquely human attribute that it's no wonder that we're so drawn to that, and that
Mm.
we, look to surround ourselves, whether it's with flowers or with art, or even like I was just thinking about this as we were sitting here. My my boyfriend's grandmother, we inherited this beautiful tea
Oh,
set.
wow.
And it's one of those like china sets that you like to put in your cabinet and not touch. And we
Yeah.
had a conversation at one point where we were like, if we have this beautiful china set, and we drink tea almost every day, why
Okay.
would we not just use it and, be careful with it and don't, mistreat it? But it's, it's good to surround yourselves with art, and you don't have to just put it somewhere out of sight and out of mind. Like bring it into your life and enjoy it. So,
Yeah.
and then, I have this teacup too. That's like a little
Oh,
more,
that's so neat.
um, but yeah, just finding the beauty, whether no matter what it is, teacups or flowers or art, and bringing it into your space and enjoying it. And I think it's such an important part of life. So I
Yeah.
totally get the overlap there. Hmm.
Okay. Good. Good. And speaking of
Yeah.
China, for our wedding, my wife and I had put whatever that list is that you do for forgive my male ignorance, but that thing you do to, what people can give you as gifts. I
Yeah.
forget.
Yeah.
Registry, I guess. Yeah, the
Yes.
registry.
Hmm.
We had compare French China, like plates and cups and things like that. And so it's expensive and it's pretty. It's French folk, it's Brittany, I think, and it's these folk drawings on plates and so forth. And for, oh, I don't know, the first 15 years they sat in a cabinet to be displayed. And my wife a few
Yeah.
years ago just put it out. She's like, let's use it because why not? Yeah. So now we
Yeah,
eat on
exactly.
compare all the time. And it's like,
Oh, I
this
love
makes,
that.
yeah, this makes sense because otherwise just sitting in a curio cabinet doing nothing. I mean, we still have
Hmm.
there's some nice pieces in there. In fact, they did a custom one for our wedding and it has our names and little figures that don't look like us, but they're
Oh,
female.
that's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, it was cute. So we don't really pull that one out. But yeah, she was, and I'm like, okay, I didn't push back too hard. I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, because eventually we'll be dead and this won't matter. It did never served
Hmm.
a function. So anywho, um, let me focus myself for a second. Let's talk about your formative years in academia and in art history. And if you want to give us whatever you're comfortable providing in a background in that sense, and then we can move into some what I consider just to be some just amazing spaces to mental spaces to occupy with the what you presented to me as research fodder. So let's find out a little about you from your background. Maybe we could start with
Sure.
the real simple, almost insipid question, like what got you inspired to art and how did that lead you
Yeah.
to university and to find that out? So let's start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Philadelphia where we have some great museums. And my mom, growing up, probably starting when I was like 5, we would do once a month a girls' day, girls'
Okay.
Saturday. And a lot of times it would mean that we would go to one of the art museums because, um, you know, my brothers and my dad weren't into that as much, but the two of us could just walk around the galleries all day. So
Okay.
we would go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I saw like an incredible Cezanne show, I think in like 2009, that I still think about.
Okay.
The Calder sculpture in the lobby, just that was so formative to me. And then, I didn't even really know that you could do art history. I watched Indiana Jones and always and always thought I'd be an archaeologist. But I took an art history class my senior year of high school and just fell in love with it. And I was like, maybe this is actually what I want to do. I don't just want to be a historian. I want to specialize in this kind of niche.
Okay.
So I went on to college in New Orleans and did my undergrad and graduate degree there in art history. Also have another degree in archaeology, so a little full
Oh,
circle on
nice.
that.
Yeah, you managed to
Um,
tick that box, right?
I did, which is
Cool.
pretty funny. So I did, I guess, get my Indiana Jones moment, but my real specialty is art history, and I just fell in love with that, and it was so cool to, you have to take a wide assortment of courses when you're studying art history. You're doing everything from ancient things to Dutch Golden Age to modern art and contemporary art,
Okay.
and it's kind of amazing to get to learn so much about human experience over such a wide swath of time in a way that I think is different. It was interesting. I guess what I'm trying to say is it was interesting to study both anthropology and archaeology and art history because they're kind of using the same things in different ways.
Hmm.
Whereas in archaeology, a lot of times you're looking at the things that are left behind, the art or the artifacts, to talk about the people and try to reconstruct what the people were like.
Okay.
a lot of times you're looking at the history and the people in art history to inform your experience of the object itself, and kind of those interesting, I don't know how those disciplines interface, I think is really interesting. But yeah, I just fell in love with it and stuck with it. And yeah, I just love art history. I'm such a nerd about it. I swear it's all day I read and write and talk about art. So
Oh, but that's so
lifelong love.
wonderful. Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's so wonderful. And we have our niches. I mean, like I I've been a plant geek pretty much my whole life. I've just
Hmm.
self-taught, very, very informally educated, but I have an obsessive personality, so I poured into that, and even had a
Yeah.
landscape business for years that helped feed that itch. I watched an interview the other day, and this is a tangent, apologize. And there was a philosophy guy. He's a professor of philosophy, and so they were doing this background thing, and it was like, well, what got you into this? And he was reading really heavy stuff like Heidegger and Nietzsche in high school and stuff. But he was talking about in his senior year, he got invited. He was from
Hmm.
Chicago, and he got invited to a philosophy camp at some university in Indiana. And so I'm just trying to think
Hmm.
of I'd love to know what the trajectories were of the people that went to this camp, but it was really intense. It was like you had to write like three
Hmm.
essays every day for 10 days,
Oh my gosh,
and deep,
yeah.
heavy philosophical stuff just to really, you know, kind of squeeze you into being dedicated to that work. So he was relaying that thing, and I'm like, wow, you're 17, 18 years old or whatever, and you're moving into that space rather intimately and getting to yeah. So anyway, that just came out when you were talking about like the things that steered you into that it's a nice driver for
Hmm.
it tests you to see if you want to really move into that space and do that. So
Hmm.
that's really cool. If you're up for it, we had decided we would talk about two different things.
Oh, I'm
There's the
sorry.
kitty. Oh, that's okay.
She
Mine,
is.
mine's
She's
usually over
only like
here.
eight. She's about 8 months old, so she's
Oh,
still very,
rambunctious.
very kitten energy. Yeah, very rambunctious.
Okay.
Her name is Ruby, but anyway, hopefully
Okay. Well,
she won't interrupt us too much, but she's just happy to walk around, I think.
oh, she's more
So
than welcome to photobomb or say hi and things like that. As long as she doesn't knock any of your tea sets in China that she
that is my constant. I have to keep it like away from
yeah,
the edge of the table,
yeah.
because she will. Luckily, she's only gotten one teacup. After that, we're much more. We won't
Okay.
leave them anywhere
Okay.
unless we're next to them.
Right.
Yeah,
Classic cat behavior. Whee!
exactly.
Off the table you go.
Mhm.
So,
Well, sorry for interrupting you, but
oh, no, no, no. We're allowed to anybody who's watched any of my shows, they're good. They're like, well, this is not structured very well. And you're gonna get those trolley comments
yeah,
like, where's the continuity? It's like, are you
yeah,
kidding me? You've never seen one of my comments. So, no, we're good. We're good. We're having fun.
perfect.
But we can go ahead and get a little bit of a convergent focus because you sent me an article on Hagia Sophia that just absolutely blew my doors, and as I was telling you before we hit record, I was going down little vortex after vortex after vortex as I was trying to get through the article. And I
Hmm.
wasn't trying because it was boring. I was trying because there were so many fascinating branch lines that I had to go check out. I even put on some Byzantine chant just to keep my little ADD from getting too crazy. I think because if I put music on when I'm reading, as long as there's no lyrics in the music, it's just, what do you call it, instrumental. I can do that. So
Hmm.
anyway, so I had my Byzantine chant going. We're reading about Hagia Sophia, and I did some background on a little bit on Hagia Sophia. And you said that article really spoke to you. Let's talk about the impact it had on you, and then let's open it up and share it with the audience a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So this article, it's by Bisera Pentcheva. I think it came out in the mid 2000s, but it was something I was introduced to in like during undergrad, and it just similar to your experience, it just made me think about things in such a unique way. I think so. The kind of the topic of the article for the listeners is imagining. Well, the title is Hagia Sophia and Multisensory Aesthetics, and it's talking about if you were a sixth century Byzantine person attending, an event or a service at the Hagia Sophia in then Constantinople, what would that experience be like, and how would being in that space, how would all of the qualities of the space affect your experience? So it gets into the glittering gold of the mosaics and how, that would refract off of the clerestory windows and how that light would shine in, how that would affect your vision in the space, how your, the smell of incense or the smell of, just being in the 6th century even, like how that would affect it. And then the acoustics of the space too. And, these chants, like you mentioned, being, all of this kind of bringing in a sense of awe and transcendence to an experience in that church. I just think it was so interesting. It made me think, I think the reason why it just stuck in my mind so much and, is that it made me just think so much. Sorry, it made me think a lot about, it's that kind of framework about how we experience art and how we experience a space and an environment. Just kind of stuck with me when I would think then about other things in art history. How could, Pentcheva's framework be applied to other kinds of spaces, whether religious or not, whether or even the experience of being in a museum or in a gallery.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of always stuck with me, and yeah, I just was blown away. I think that a lot of people were, because that article was highly lauded in the art history realm, for just being a really unique path, or new thread in art history to pull on. So I always admire scholars that are able to find something new to say about something so old. I think that's a really special thing.
Yeah, the author really took their time to, as you said, do a sort of multimedia, multi-sensory engagement of analyzing, the structural, functional, organizational features of the church itself,
Mm-hmm.
or now the mosque. And she used a term, or was it, I don't know their gender, but they or she used the term for polymorphy that was
Mm-hmm.
facilitated by the things that we're mentioning, and that light hitting a marble surface, and there's gold nearby, or sparkly things, as they said. It got my imagination rolling, because there's a band called the Dead Can Dance, and it's
Mm-hmm.
Lisa Gerrard and Brendan Perry from Australia. And they did a video 30 years ago, and Brendan was talking about the name, the Dead Can Dance, and it was bringing animacy from inanimacy. And, it was a strong metaphor to, not about dead people dancing, it's more about taking an instrument, bringing it to life, and engaging in a reciprocal way with the performer and the audience, and the coupling that goes on. And so I was thinking about that term, not necessarily the band, but just the idea of bringing animacy out of inanimacy for the sake of that transcendent experience in ritual, and in the liturgy, and the processional aspects of what they were doing in the 6th, 7th century. So that just got me really to thinking, because I think, like in my cheesy amateur philosophical viewing of the world, I think transcendence is afforded by ritual and disruption. So there is the ritual that is embedded there, but when you're a peasant farmer, or you're a peasant merchant, or whatever, in Istanbul, in the 6th, 7th century, and you go into this amazing place that had to have been very disruptive to your normal other days of your life, that you're just mongering fish or grains or whatever it is, cheese, and then you get into that, and you see these subtle, I hate to use the word trickeries, but these subtle plays and manipulations on medium. So anyway, I'm rambling, but it just got me thinking. That's how you become a devoted follower or practitioner of Greek Orthodox faith for that instance. But that it's this annealing or this kind of maybe reifying process for that faith. It helps you to build your faith that way, that you're just in this incredible thing, right? And then it leads you to whatever your transcendence means. Sorry, it was kind of like got me thinking about
and even into the architecture, the domes, and like reaching up to the heavens. And I think it's just, I haven't been able to visit there yet. That's like my must go in my life. I have to go. But I have not been yet. I was actually due to go to Turkey in the summer of 2020. I had gotten like a grant during my graduate studies to go, and that did not happen, obviously.
I'd say
But
not.
I haven't been in that space, but I just think about it all the time. The light, and then over time, visiting today, how there's been all of these layers in this space too. So it starts as a church, Byzantine church. It becomes a mosque after Mehmed the Conqueror takes it in, I think, 14 something, 15th century. Um, and then, from there, it becomes a museum, and then now it's back to being a mosque again. You can visit, but, thinking about how those layers and meanings get changed over time too. And how the experience of viewing it today might be different, but might also be the same. You still have that glittering gold on all the walls, that mosaic work. You still have, now that it's a place of worship again, I'm sure you have some beautiful vocalization in there as well. But I don't know, it's interesting to think about how over time things take on new meanings too. There's actually this is a fun fact about the Hagia Sophia, that there's even some Viking graffiti up in the top, like up in some of the upper registers of the church where I'm forgetting his name. We actually know his name because he literally wrote Sven or whatever
Was here.
is here. Yeah,
Yeah.
he literally wrote it on the wall at some point when the Vikings made it there. So, and that all of this becomes part of what is now, still there today. It's kind of amazing to think about all of the meanings and experiences and the people that have been in a space like that, and how that experience might parallel those early experiences, but also be different now with all the new layers and, that have of meaning that have been added to that space.
Yeah.
So.
And I think the author also mentioned when we were talking about the acoustics and the polyphony of the reverberance in the church, that they timed it to be actually a 10-second reverberation, which for a natural structure to have reverberancy for 10 seconds is fascinating, because I play around with synthesizers and delay pedals and effects. So it's like, I think about 10 seconds of reverberation artificially with machines and stuff. No big deal. You can just dial it up. But to get that in nature, or the agreement between nature and persons, human beings, it's just, yeah, that's and here's the thing, did they know when they were engineering the structure, whatever the equivalent of their architectural drawings, renderings, or blueprints or whatever, did they have in mind that they, so in other words, did they have the wherewithal to know that the acoustics would turn out, or did they happenstantially make these sort of hippodomes or whatever, or these whatever's on the top structure of the church, that just happened to have that acoustic value, or that the length of the sanctuary part of the church had that value? I'm curious. Do you know if anybody's dug into that archaeologically to say they had that presence of mind to know that they would develop this to get an effect?
So I don't know if I don't know much about that as far as the acoustics go, but I do know that we know the names of the architects who have some Greek names that I'm not going to be able to say now. But if you can look up who the architects of that church were. We know who they are. There's documentation on that, which is really cool. I think it's a relatively early example of that. But it definitely, I think, in building something that big too, it's in the vestibule when you walk in, there's this, one of the mosaics is Emperor Justinian of, just the Byzantine Empire, who has in this mosaic, he has a scale model of the Hagia Sophia in his hands. And he's lifting it up so in mosaics, the building that you're in is rendered in small. And he's giving it to, the Madonna and Child, and this idea that you've built something so pleasing to a higher power, that it's almost like a gift that you've given. And then, I don't know, I think that's such a cool part of this too, that he literally presents it to, the Madonna and Child, and as a present almost. It's really a special experience. But I don't know about the acoustics. I should look into that.
Yeah, the honorific of that gesture is it's fitting, but from a 21st century kind of, and I'm very jaded, it's like it's
Yeah.
really, really beautiful and special that and Justinian, I'm sure, was a powerful person, and so that they transcended
Hmm.
their own emperorness or lordness or whatever they were, whatever their
Hmm.
title was, that they came to that they were able to do it. Now, with regard to the art that was applied to the building, the structure itself. Do we know that were there artists commissioned who were noteworthy prior, or were these people from the region that were brought in? Is there much speak of that in
So
analyzing?
to my understanding at this point, it's still more of a trade if you're, a
Oh, okay,
mosaic worker.
okay,
So no, I don't know of any names or titles, but
okay.
thinking about all those tesserae and the amount of labor that you need to do a building of that scale is
Yeah,
incredible. So you can imagine there were, a really large group of people that were placing and laying this. Um, but yeah, I'm not certain about the exact organization of that labor, but definitely a trade where you probably have an apprenticeship, you become skilled, and then you get brought in to do big projects of that
okay,
type. Um, and the Byzantines love mosaics, so there's no
yeah,
shortage of. They have
sure.
some just beautiful churches too in Ravenna and other parts of um, other parts of Europe that are just incredible from them and Asia.
Yeah, I remember one. And again, I'm so ignorant with art, but and having gone to the Louvre in the early mid, I think 93, 94, no, I think it was 94. They had the triptychs that were from a later period, I believe, but
Hmm.
again, it was embossed in gold, and it was the Madonna Child usually represented, or seraphims and cherubs and things like that. And
Hmm.
but just the triptych art that they had on display, I had prior appreciation for it, but getting there and seeing it, and I don't know, this might have been 13th, 14th century art from Western Europe, but just seeing that. And I relate that to the Byzantine art because it's to me aesthetically similar. That's this um,
Hmm.
certainly you could straighten me out on like all the differences, but just the impact that it has, again, as somebody who's a very secular person, but also can see the power behind that, and the affect that it would have on a faithful person. That's
Hmm.
always been something that stood out to me, because despite my just having said I'm a secular person, I'm just so fascinated with mysticism and spirituality in that regard, that it is part of our human
Hmm.
experience, like, again, from an anthropological lens. There's a huge
Yeah,
significance
absolutely.
that cannot be disregarded, and it has to be held sacred. For any other
Hmm.
lack of words, it has to be held sacred. So that's always been impressive to me. So, um, before we leave antiquity, was there something else you wanted to speak to that for your life and for your studies that just kind of just speaks to your heart, or wows you, or what in your journey through your educational experience, were there other locations or artists or anything like that from you'll go from the 7th century all back up to maybe early modern, like I don't know, 8th, 16th, 17th century, wherever you want to stop before we move into
Yeah,
more modernity.
I mean, my master's thesis was about the Crusades and kind of how people come
Oh.
to meet each other
Hmm.
during that. So in Jerusalem, you have Frankish folks coming in, you have um, you know, different different caliphates that have
Hmm.
controlled Jerusalem at different points in time. And that's always really interesting on how that artwork, the metalworks that are so amazing in Syria,
Hmm.
and that during this period, how they kind of track over to Europe and become part of, the Saint Louis Baptistry and things like that. Anyway, I'm always drawn to that. But then the other thing, and then I had just a fantastic class where I was like, maybe this is what I want to specialize in, was about the Dutch Golden Age and how,
Um,
the beginnings of reaching across the world and this idea of collecting and, like you were saying about a cabinet of curios earlier, them inventing this cabinet of curio idea of collecting things from your travels all around the world. And um, I don't know, I just always think it's so interesting, like the way that that people just are so drawn to different things.
mhm.
Anyway, I'm not explaining that very well, but I love that concept of the Wonder Camera and the this, which really then grows into this concept of the museum and, this idea of preserving by putting it in a box. That's something I always was reflecting about in graduate school. Why are museums the best place for things to live? Can you imagine if they, talking to Hagia Sophia, took like a mosaic off the wall and shipped it somewhere? It wouldn't, you would lose part
Yeah,
of that experience too, but then maybe more people see it. So it's
yeah.
kind of always an interesting idea of where we encounter art and, you know, what that experience is like. That's something I really enjoy. Definitely for older things that become displaced over time and,
Okay.
end up in different places. But um anyway, I could ramble about that all day too. So I'll
Well, as we said before we hit record, and I'll say to the audience that there may be a couple of conversations with Catie, so we'll bring her back because there was far too much to cover. But yeah, I mean,
yeah.
we can open that up if you want. And it's an interesting thought that, the museum is the sort of default, what we would intuit to be a default place to curate and to preserve and display that which is our history, the artifacts of our history, literal artifacts of our history, not just conceptual artifacts. Well, there's that too. But
And it's conceptualized that it's impartial, that it's it's white walls, and that means that the experience is just pure, and that, it kind of removes so much context but it, if you're in a room in a museum, there's so many things in the same room. You can be in the Africa section and then pop over to European painting again.
mhm.
And this idea that this constructed experience of you going through a space um, is impartial, or that these things just arrived here. When you read wall text and it's all in passive voice, like this, painting was added to the collection, and you're like, how did the painting added itself to the collection? Someone
Yeah.
bought this and brought it here, or maybe didn't even buy it, but someone brought this here, and um, that all that context gets kind of taken out of a museum setting. And I love museums. Do not get me wrong. This is not
Right,
a
right.
ride on museums, but um, I think that, and there's a lot of museums that are trying to play with that idea more as we, grow and explore some of these ideas and confront history in more direct ways in some cases. I think it's interesting to see how the museum will kind of continue to transform and grow
Mm.
throughout, the next few decades. Um, but I always come back to that idea of, walking through a museum, and that you could be, if you're at the Met, you could be in ancient Egypt, and then you could be in Europe, and then you could be in, ancient Greece in 10 minutes. But that's obviously a constructed experience. It's not, you're
Yeah,
not actually in any of these places. And
right.
the way we display it informs that, the way that museums, I should say, display art can inform that
Hmm.
experience or that construction. So um, I always love to think on that when I'm in a museum space too.
Hmm. I like that idea, and it would take creative minds to keep it from being cheesy, but at the same time, it's kind of a second, it's an abstraction. The art can still be the f prominent feature, but that the background will have its own context, I guess, or perspective that it lends it.
Hmm.
Like you said, it ties it into um, the place that it comes from and the period that it occupied, of the time temporal period that it occupied. So I like that. And you say people are starting to maybe flirt with that idea and maybe trying to dip their toes in that water, or is it something that's not quite on
Yeah,
the?
I mean, some places I think, do. I think, there's a lot over the past few years, a big topic kind of in the museum world is, repatriation, and in some
Hmm.
instances, actually moving some objects in the museum back to their maybe original location or original place. I think that, that movement's probably going to continue, but some museums will I think will continue to move behind that, and then others I think probably will not. Like, so for example, the British Museum has a firm no repatriation policy.
Mm.
They won't even consider it for anything in their collection.
Mm.
So, and that's just been museum policy for as long as it's been there.
Mm.
But things like, the Elgin marbles that are that came from Greece, of course, um, you know, or the Benin bronzes that they have, like those will probably always remain there. So I think some places though are looking to, maybe even through programming and the types of events or the types of speakers they bring in, try to bridge those gaps that the museum has in context sometimes. Rethinking wall text, rethinking exhibitions, what kind of stories are being told. I think that's definitely for a lot of museums on the forefront of how can they, take what can be somewhat a troublesome history in some instances, but make it today something that's valuable and important to the communities that they serve too, because the people that will go there the most are probably the people that live around there. How can they speak to that audience? I
Mm-hmm.
think is on a lot of museum, professionals' minds probably
Okay.
at this juncture.
I wonder if the British might be amenable to the idea, and this is kind of far-fetched, but we have embassies in other countries, and you
Yeah.
could designate 1,500 square feet to be some little whatever that would be, the consulate of art for
Hmm.
Greece or Iran or former Mesopotamia, where you have their artifacts there that were plundered
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
the British imperial reign. So,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe they could step down a little bit and just say, okay, this is and it's just like there's a place here in Florida that I think it's on the West Coast, and there's a little slice of Cuba there, and it's actually Cuba. But it's a park, and it's it's not like Cuba.
Yeah.
It's just there was something back probably in the 19th century, early 20th century, and it became this thing, and just like again in Washington D.C., you've got the embassies and
Hmm.
consulates that
Yeah. Yeah.
afford them their space, and it's their sovereign territory. And if you're in trouble, you can try to run and claim some sort of amnesty in their sanctuary or whatever. So anyway, it's a thought. If you're a British politician or whatever, just disregard me, but it can be your idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely traveling exhibitions too, I feel like is a lot of times how that works, if
Right.
somewhere, if I think all the time about, King Tut, when King Tut went on tour, and
Right.
they put his sarcophagus all over the world.
Yeah.
I think that's a way too to bring collections to new audiences, and that's been going on for a while. So I think continuing to put efforts into those, get
Mm,
you know get those,
yeah.
recently at the, I think, I can't remember if it was, I should remember this. I think it was at the Met. They had Manet's Ophelia, or they
Okay.
had um, got brought over from the Musée d'Orsay for the first time ever. The first time it ever left that collection, it went to New York, which was a big deal. I think continuing to kind of build those relationships between
Yeah.
museums will be really cool. I'm
Mm.
not in the museum world. I always thought I would end up there, but and I love museums so much. So I hope this didn't come off like I'm saying museums are terrible. I think that we
No.
just continuing to rethink
Yeah.
and
Update.
using, yeah, updating and using technology. I think there's a lot of routes that we can go to continue to improve that experience for the visitors, and for maybe the just to bring that art to new people. I think
Yeah.
that's always a good thing.
We could almost look at zoos as a good
Yeah.
analogy, that zoos 50 years ago, these poor animals were living in, terrible conditions, and their welfare was not thought of. And now I think zoos, some of the more enlightened ones are saying, well, this needs to be more like a sanctuary, or, these creatures. First of all, let's stop bringing creatures in from the wild to be observed, but, while they're here in captivity, that they can be afforded a more humane, or tiger reign, or whatever existence that suits them a little more, and we can titrate out of that 19th century mindset that you put an animal in a cage and you get to look at it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a bad metaphor or analogy for art, but it's that thing where they're reforming themselves, and they're saying, we'll take animals out of cages and put them in a quasi environment that's more suited to their liking, or their mental health, or whatever. and
Hmm.
that we can do that with art in museums, and that the museum can reform itself a little bit to be less of that sterile structure that, appropriated someone else's work, or there was not a friendly reciprocity in the acquisition of the work. However that shakes out, that same kind of mindset of reform maybe could onboard itself
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
see us into a future. But I'm with you. My whole life, I grew up in DC, so I had the Smithsonian, the downtown mall or
Oh
whatever it's
yeah.
called. Yeah, and there was a Corcoran Gallery, so they did more
Hmm.
of the modern art. And I can remember in high school, I actually went down to see the Georgia O'Keeffe display back in the '80s, and that was like,
Oh
ooh.
yeah.
I didn't know anything about her, but I was like, I walked around and wow, that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
And then they had the older classic, like all the Dutch masters, 17th century Dutch
Yep.
art in the
Hmm.
big gallery. And so my father and I would go through there, and that was very impressive. But I always preferred the Corcoran Gallery, even though I don't know where I lie as far as my favorite, artist or period, or I know who my favorite artist is, but I mean, as far as a genre of art or specific type or whatever, I don't know. But I like Mary Cassatt is probably my
Is your favorite artist?
yeah, I
She's one
love.
of my favorites
Oh,
too.
cool. There's just so much coming out of her work, and I love Impressionism.
Hmm.
And I love that period and France. I'm a little bit of a Francophile, and but
Hmm.
and she was an American, but I mean just the Impressionists
Yeah.
themselves. But just the work she did with women's faces and the children, and she just nailed it for me in terms of feeling and evocation, whatever that is. So yeah, I
Hmm.
like I like Mary. But I also like Hieronymus Bosch because I did a lot of drugs when I was younger. So I love Hieronymus Bosch. I actually went to the Prado to go see his work. Oh my God, it was so beautiful. And that
Yeah.
was like a
I've
pilgrimage
been
for me.
I've been to the Prado too.
Okay.
It is an experience to see that for the first time. I love Mary Cassatt too because I also have always loved Impressionism. Philadelphia has so many
Mm,
great Impressionist paintings there.
okay.
Um, like the Barnes Foundation, I think is the world's biggest single collection of Renoirs
Oh
anywhere.
wow.
So I grew up just loving Impressionism as well. But
Okay.
Mary Cassatt, I think, is so special because out of all of the Impressionists in that main group, she is, essentially getting because of kind of the homosocial realms of the time where, men go out during the day, women stay home
Hmm.
with other women and the children.
Hmm.
She gets such a unique view of life in 19th century France that a lot of the other Impressionists, Monet and Renoir and others, you don't see that type of interaction unless it's their
Hmm.
own family. But she had so many mothers of children in her life. I agree. She does. That's where I think she shines best, is
Yeah.
those really intimate. The love is so palpable in those paintings. I just adore them. So
Hmm.
anyway, I agree. I totally agree with you on Mary
Okay.
Cassatt.
Yeah, she's just always stood out to me. And am I right? She was an American, and was
Hmm.
she okay? Okay. Because I saw.
Philadelphian, actually,
Oh,
too.
cool. There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. I saw a biography a few years ago on her, and yeah, quite. I have to watch it again because I was struck by her, I guess, audacity or her tenacity or whatever it is. Like you said, she was a woman in a
Hmm.
man's world at her time in history, and that she did what she did was a little heterodox, and that,
Hmm.
and there were others, but yeah,
And unmarried and forged her own path. Didn't really, you know, like you said, kind of ran in a man's world and
mhm.
did was one of the best, I think, of that original group too. So I agree. She's special and really cool, I think.
There
Yeah.
you go. Absolutely. We both have good taste in our impressionists.
Yeah.
Yours is a much more informed taste, but I just
No, I don't
she
even think so.
well, I
You
mean,
can
you don't
just
need to be an
feel when
expert to
you,
love something, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I yield to your authority because you put your
No,
time
totally.
in on this. Um, I think we are coming up about 50 minutes. So let's open up what we had talked about before we hit record, and we can go as long as we want on it because I think it's another fascinating chapter in history. Or that's option A. Do you want to bring anything to the fore now that we could go on for about 15, 20 minutes that may tie in a contiguous way with what we've been talking about, like sort of more history, or what would you like to do? Because I want you back. If this is a good experience, I want to have you back for another conversation where we'll touch on other things that we can address later before we say
Yeah.
goodbye. What would you like to do? Do you want
Yeah,
to
well,
talk about the post-war?
Yeah, I was also just going to say, I mean, if you want to see a good transition, I was just thinking about, talking about Americans going to France to
Oh,
study and
yeah.
paint Impressionism. For
Hmm.
so long, Europe and particularly France by the end of the 19th century and England as being, the hubs and the centers of the art world, like the most creative people, the best artists, like that everyone knew are living
Hmm.
in these places and working in these places. Even if you're Mary Cassatt, you're going to go to Paris
Hmm.
to paint. And, Claude Monet would have people come to, um, stay with him and learn to paint in Giverny, come out for the summer and stay in Giverny. And so many American Impressionists were trained that way,
Okay.
um, spending time over there. But then just to transition us to more modern, you see this shift happen after, in the post-war period, which I think is really cool, where US hegemony kind of rises and America kind of becomes the hub, the center, and New York really as the center of the art world, where that's the place to be. That's where all the galleries are, the best
Okay.
art dealers, the most famous artists, and that's where people are wanting to go. And that shift, I think, is just so intriguing and interesting to it's kind of one of those big culture shifts where, the United States kind of starts becoming the definer of culture on a more global scale when prior it had always been, not at least in many spheres had always been Europe. Um, so anyway, just to transition us, thinking about
Yeah.
even from our Mary Cassatt to, 50 years later, it's already changed.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Did that transition occur in part due to the catastrophic conditions post-war in Europe, and that we were relatively unscathed, other than having sacrificed a lot of lives in that war? But our infrastructure, like you said, New York City was, more or less uh, unperturbed during the period. And did that play a part? Did we inherit it, or was it sort of a more of a forceful grab in terms of the attention, the resources and the capability in that transition?
Yeah. I mean, I think you could argue both of those things. I definitely think, France, had some really terrible conditions after the war. A lot of cities are rubble and rebuilding that takes time. And of course, just our geographic location kind of preserved us from a lot of the bombings and the fire bombings that, affected
Mm,
so many European cities. Um, a lot of artists during that period in France, by the way, kind of fled Paris and spent time down in Nice along the coast and developed an interesting artist enclave. But as far as the United States, it was, I think that it's more, I think that it's one that we were relatively preserved. But I think too, just that broader geopolitical power shift where,
mm,
we're getting involved in global politics in a big way and we're getting involved in the Hague and whatever it is
yeah.
that we're in the UN and um, even like the tensions of the Cold War. We've done this big fight. We've gone over there and fought on the ground. We come back, we're victorious, and we have this new power, but we're still under pressure and scared. And I think that a lot of the art that comes out in those initial years, like in the 50s and 60s, speaks to that anxiety and like
Mm.
that also just kind of jadedness after the war, having seen terrible things and heard terrible things and like heard about, what was going on in Germany. I think that a lot of people were just really jaded and anxious as this Cold War continues to build and build. Um, so you see, like with the abstract expressionists, these really gestural, sometimes frenetic painting, or with, you think of Rothko, some of these color field painters who are looking to just get in touch with this emotional depth by um, through their work in many ways and feeling something when you look at art. I think it's really interesting how both of those two kind of paths, you have like your really gestural abstract painters and even your color field painters are kind of speaking to that anxiety and, you know, negotiating the new world that they're in
Okay.
after the war. So I think, but I think that why does then abstract expressionism take hold and become, the new poppin' thing all around the world? I think that it is because the U.S. had just been able to solidify its power and its state in a broader global landscape after World War II.
Do you think some of the gravity or inertia behind this more, if you could say, avant-garde or experimental art was also fueled by what was more uh, pervasive in the social context of the sort of post-war feel good, can do, we're out of the depression, we're not getting butchered in wars right now, all that kind of thing that was rising up in the late 40s into the 50s, that I think there was this kind of 180-degree turn from the horror of the 30s and the depression and then
Yeah.
war and all these kind of things. And I can't help but think that, just like in a individual human being's life where they get into a really bad car accident, it's terrible. And then you're in your recovery phase. And if you're somewhat still you, that you're grateful and happy and that you can, recapture your life.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if that's part of the psyche and what's going on in that zeitgeist of
Yeah.
art culture and more broad culture.
Yeah. And I think, that, the baby boomers, building families, moving
Mhm.
out of the cities, having more money, war makes good money.
Yeah.
People had money to spend and, we're looking for the good life. And I think that art and being able to indulge in art and culture, was a nice way to, I don't even think it's just escapism, but it's, you have now the wavelength to do that. It's the
Hmm.
good time now for many people who are, you know, having big families, having big homes, having some more money in their pocket than maybe they did, like you said, in the decades prior. I think that that all definitely could be part of it too, on why
Hmm.
you start to see this much more, I think, intentional structure like and market for art in this time,
Okay.
where prior it was there, of course people were always buying art, but I think that the way you can draw a point kind of from then to today with how the big dealers and big galleries in New York especially, um, were really growing at this time and launching the careers of many of these artists, like
Okay.
Jackson Pollock. Peggy Guggenheim was paying Jackson Pollock a stipend so that he could like afford groceries because he was so poor, just so he could
Or
paint.
oh wow.
And now think about how many of his
Yeah.
paintings are in the MoMA, and like,
Yeah.
he goes on to sell paintings for millions. But
Yeah.
at the beginning of his career, that was not the case. And for most of the artists, they were not maybe as wealthy, but the right people with the right money invested in them at such a, kind of crucial point, and were able to ride that wave, the broader global wave of American power. I think some of the money, having more wealthy clientele available in places like New York, and launching some of these careers of people who we today are like household names,
Yeah.
which is amazing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. That they had those benefactors that had the right
Hmm.
uh, social capital or cultural capital to help propel them out of obscurity and into that prominence. And what a lottery that is.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess
absolutely.
that happens in the music industry too. I mean, you got so many
Hmm.
talented people playing for beer money in bars, and you got people with talent, that are making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I pause
Hmm.
when I say talent. It's subjective, but it's like I know there are people out there who are incredible musicians and artists, and most of us will never hear from them. So it's good for those that surfaced and took
Yeah.
rode that trajectory up. I was also thinking when we were talking about all this enthusiasm that came out post-war was the futurists, the people imagining the future. Even
Yeah.
in children's cartoons, you had futurism and the unlimited imaginal
Hmm.
that was on tap or accessible, I guess, in that period. Of course, in the 50s, we can't wax too sentimental about it being so great. I mean, they had inflation, they had war,
Yeah,
they still had a lot of crap to deal with. But I just think,
definitely,
but
definitely.
that rebound from again, from 1929 to 1946 or seven, you had that depression, and then
Hmm.
you had the war towards the end of that. And I'm just trying to steelman that culture's mentality
Hmm.
and getting out of it. And like you said, the kids that were being born in the 40s, like my parents' generation, the boomers and the GIs and stuff like that, that they were coming in on that. And of course, when they came to their Belle Epoque, their youth, their rebellion, that was phenomenal. Yeah, just in the late
In
60s
the
and early 70s,
60s, yeah.
all the craziness, but that
Summer
was a
of Love.
yeah, and that was afforded to them by the success that was had, So there's all these
Yeah.
causal chain that goes on. Um, do we want to take on Taking Venice real quick and tie that in because
Yeah.
that's a really neat story, and I don't watch I went on a binge for 10 years and I watched like 1,500 movies, but now I don't watch movies anymore because I'd rather watch YouTube philosophy talk and weird
Yeah.
heady stuff and try to understand it. But let's talk about Taking Venice and that whole concept of as concomitant with everything we said, we had a Cold War going on. We had these sort of
Hmm.
crazy chess games going on culturally and politically and the polity and things like that. That's been released, right? That trailer you sent me, is
Yeah. So
streamable,
that
accessible?
documentary, yeah. So unfortunately, it's, I think, currently on limited release. I think
Okay.
which is, so I still haven't seen it. I think it looks just amazing, but I wanted to send it over in case maybe you were in
Yeah.
a place where they're going to do a screening soon.
Oh, okay.
Um, but it's called Taking Venice, and it's all about the lead up to the 1964 Venice Biennale. And you used this phrase earlier when we were chatting before we hit record, and I loved it. The Olympics of art. It really
Yeah.
is kind of like that.
Okay. I think that
The
was part
Venice
of the
Biennale is
tagline for
like,
the trailer or something. Yeah.
yeah, like the creme de la creme, the best artist. You pick essentially one artist to go and represent your country
Okay.
in Venice. And it's a big show, big pavilions, and it's kind of a big deal. And it basically had never been, well, not basically, it had never been won by an American until 1964. Robert Rauschenberg gets sent to Venice and wins the gold medal, which was a big deal. And what's really interesting about the Taking Venice documentary, and I think the story, which a lot of people have kind of delved into and picked apart, is that there's a lot of discussion on whether this was rigged, whether there was
Okay.
even like CIA involvement in this,
Wow.
like as a Cold War play. And I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but
Yeah.
which I'm not trying to say,
Speculation, everyone. Speculation.
yeah,
Yeah.
speculation here, but that there was a lot of ties between the Museum of Modern Art, which is brand new at this time, that there's an overlap in staff between them and who go on to be the CIA,
Okay.
and that this was a big cultural play that you know presenting the United States as kind of the arbiter of culture served some other aims in the broader Cold War
Mhm.
environment that they were living in. So I think it's just so intriguing. And that really is like a pivot point at 1964 Biennale is really, all conspiracies aside, I feel that more importantly, it was that crucial shift embodied. It was, America, New York and American artists are kind of the leading artists of the world, that they're literally winning the gold medal as the best. And I think
We've
that was a,
arrived. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, a really big deal at the time, and I think ends up tracking to today, where you have the Gagosian galleries, the Pace galleries, all these New York powerhouses that were around at this time. Well, not all of them were around at this time, but Leo Castelli, who was around at this time, goes on to mentor Larry Gagosian, who now
Hmm.
is the number one art dealer in the world, and don't see him falling from that anytime soon. They just make so much art.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a really interesting. I want to see this documentary so bad, because I think it's the first time I've seen one come out that I think gets the whole story, and I think is going to be really intriguing. I think it's gotten pretty good reviews, so
Mm.
hopefully we'll get a wider release
Okay.
soon. But
Yeah. If not, look to your local art house. We have a really good art center here. We're members. And
mhm.
when I was a younger person, I moved to this town that I live in when I was 21. I went to the art house every Tuesday night. saw so many
Mhm.
amazing. See, that's a whole nother show we could do, is just talking about film on art.
Yeah.
Like there was yeah. Anyway, I won't even go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, there's so much there. But anyway, so that this place was really neat, and I would maybe see if the curator there or the overseer of the acquisition of films would be able to get
Hmm.
that, because that would be neat. Just the trailer itself seemed really interesting, and such an interesting chapter in global history. Do you know what the were the Europeans horrified that Rauschenberger won this? Because if you Google up his work, and they showed elements of it in the trailer, it's an acquired taste. There's some I've seen
Yeah.
things of his that are really more palatable, but there's some really chalk pieces, I would call that. And maybe that's wrong of me to say that,
Hmm.
but there's just things that are there to be provocative, I think, or express themselves in a very unique way. So not
Yeah.
in a tawdry way, not in a
No, no.
bawdy way, but just sheep with tires around them, or whatever you want to call it. It's just
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
It definitely, yeah, and his assemblage, like the combines he would make, the assemblages where things are hanging off of
Okay.
canvases and there's this collage. And, I think that it definitely was, you know, I think surprising um, at that time because, think about what's going on in France. You coming out of, you have the academic, this is in now the 19th century, but just to trace, you have academic art. So the Academy of Arts, you're training how to be a painter and you learn and you imitate the style. That's like your really realistic
Right.
battle scenes and things like that. Then you get, you know, the Impressionists and some Orientalist stuff, but Orientalism is still kind of bound up in the academic tradition.
Okay.
You get the Impressionists who are rejecting that, and then that grows into, kind of the early modernism with Matisse and Picasso, but they're not. They're kind of going a different path, and I think that I don't know. It's interesting to look at how it all builds and builds, and then I think like the American avant-garde, like Rauschenberg, I think just kind of knocked people's socks off. They're like, I've never seen things like this,
Hmm.
really at the time. And yeah, they're just all of those artists in that period. I think, de Kooning and Rothko and Frankenthaler and Krasner, I think that they all kind of just made things that really people hadn't done before,
Hmm.
in the way that just to change tastes. And I think at the Biennale, there was probably a lot of shock at this outcome. And you know, I think at some point, then the question became like, if you can't beat them, join them. We have to start doing different things and pursue. We have to look to New York
Yeah.
as Parisians for art, which is shocking.
I was gonna say that's so sacrosanct. It's a violation of sacrosanctity or whatever, for the
Yeah,
French to concede anything in food and art and love and all these things.
I know, and the French have and all those years of all these American expats who where are they all going? They're all
Yeah,
going to Paris. So you
to
got to be in
Paris.
Paris,
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden you don't need to be in Paris. You can be in New York,
yeah.
and um, that becoming this hub, and I think it's just so cool. And I love thinking about how then even today, New York is still kind of the hub. I'll tell you a joke really quick. Not a joke, but um, I always, I studied art history and I was always like, I don't want to move to New York. I'll do
Oh yeah,
anything. I've somehow managed to dodge it
that's cool.
after all this time, but and no offense to New York listeners out there. I love to visit New York.
Right.
I don't think I'm tough enough for that
Yeah.
city. So,
I say the same thing
um,
about Miami. I go there
yeah,
5 or 6 times a year because it's just down the road,
yeah.
but I don't want to live there, but I love it. So
I'm
anyway,
like, I don't think I'm tough enough for New York,
no, yeah,
but really, if you want to have, my experience is not a traditional one. You kind of have to go cut your teeth in New York at some point if you
okay,
are an American who wants to be, um, in some of these really influential art spheres. That's
okay,
kind of where you need to be.
yeah,
Um, Now you see the kind of the rise of the Asian market too. Anyway, I won't go on that track, but in more recent decades, the markets in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia are exploding as well. So
mm,
it's always curious to see, will there be another shift down the
okay,
line where maybe it was Paris, then it's New York, maybe next to Hong Kong. Who's to say? So it's
Like hosting
interesting.
the Olympics. It's like who's because
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into being the host, right? I mean,
Hmm.
all the wheeling and dealing and schmoozing and budgets and things like that. So, not that that's
Hmm.
contrived. That's something, but so I think that happens more spontaneously, what you just described, right? I mean, it seems like attention goes there, and it's not about
Yeah.
greasing people beforehand. I think is it more just where the momentum moves itself,
Yeah, that's the sense I get.
Okay.
I get the sense that, and sometimes it's hard to explain what it could be. Sometimes it's just right place, right time. How did
Hmm.
you manage to get such a collection of artists in New York at that time? Is the same true about if went to, just because you said Des Moines earlier, if you went to Des Moines, is there a collection of artists like that there? Maybe the structure, the dealers just aren't there to get it out.
Okay.
It's interesting to think about, why do things happen the way that they do, where you get such a strong class of artists in New York in the 50s and 60s and into the 80s with Warhol and
Hmm.
Basquiat and all of that as well. Um, and not other places. I think especially as someone that lives in the South, outside of that, these big hubs,
Right.
I think that, you know, I think that a lot of it is just the structure, like those galleries and those dealers exist. I don't know how, I couldn't tell you exactly why or how New York is where it got started, probably because it's so big, there's so many
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
But, if you had that kind of structure and that kind of attention, those really visionary dealers, those galleries that make the big difference, those museums that are going to invest in, you know, rising stars in painting or photography or sculpture, could you see a shift out of just New York and LA to, could you ever see a Mobile that was an
Hmm.
art hub?
Yeah.
Um, Good example of that right now is Atlanta.
Okay.
Is really growing and expanding. So I love to see that. I love to see really, support the artists that are here in the South. There's so many great ones,
Okay.
and really talented people. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I won't keep rambling on that, but
Well, yeah, yeah, no, we've given the audience a lot to digest. And again, if this was a good experience for you, I'd like to bring you back. We had talked about maybe bringing anthropology in and media,
yeah,
social theory,
absolutely.
media theory, all that kind of thing to lens things or perspectively shift on things. I think that would be really fun, and I'm pretty sure my subscribership would enjoy that. One question that came to mind just now about Satsuma and what you
Mhm.
do is we talked about your clients, but do you have a stable or do you curate a collection of artists that you work with, or is there a database that if you can of artists online that you can access? How does that work for you when you broker art, or if do you do
Yes,
that in the first place? You do that, right? That's a silly
yeah, I
question, but
do. Yeah, so I do, and the way that my I work on a project basis, so a client, and it's always going to be different. But
okay.
then I get to kind of put on my matchmaker hat and say,
Oh,
okay,
okay.
here's the space that we have, here's what the client likes, here's what they don't like, here's their budget. And it's my job to go find art, and a lot of times an artist that fits all those, you know, fits in all those boxes. And to do that, I've built a lot of relationships with artists over the years from working with them, where I can call them up and say, hey, do you have availability for a special commission in the next month? What do you have in your studio available today?
Okay.
And that's something I do constantly. I get coffee with multiple artists every
Ah,
week,
wow.
usually in the area,
That's so
or
neat.
I'll have a video call with them. And it's kind of my job to keep that Rolodex in my head so that I can, help them, so that I can get their art sold on their behalf, and
Right.
also make my client happy because I found the perfect piece that maybe they didn't know is out there. So I
Okay.
love kind of being that
Ah,
in the middle
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's great, and I'm just so I'm just so thrilled that I get to work with so many talented people all the time, who make things that blow me away, and I get to just kind of keep up to date with what they're doing, what they're producing, so that when the time comes and the right project comes along, I know who I can go to find something really special. So I love that part of my job. I love getting to work with the artists themselves.
It's got to be
Mhm.
amazing. It's so creative and so it connects you to so much whatever it is. Yeah, the talent
Yeah.
and the drive, the motivation. That's what I would see is that people who are doing this, and creating art, and people who are enthusiastic about enriching their lives with art and having an aesthetic in their environment that is pleasing and therapeutic and all these things that we've discussed. I think
Mhm.
that's just uh, yeah, here's to more of that in the world, in doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, one last question. This is a question rather than a discussion.
Yes.
Do you create art yourself? Do you dabble? Do you do art? Do you have a medium that you like, or do you want save that for another conversation, or just
I
you don't have to answer?
I truthfully don't make
Okay,
art really myself. I always joke, I was not blessed artistically, so I
okay,
studied art history. That's why I,
right,
made it here. But um, I've dabbled in things over the
okay,
years. I liked photography.
mm,
I've done a little bit of ceramics and like, wheel throwing, but nothing nothing really on an everyday basis. It's something more that I enjoy looking at and talking about
okay,
and learning about
okay,
than an actual endeavor that I pursue myself.
okay. That's totally cool. I mean, because yeah,
Hmm.
you would be doing something else, I think, if that were a strong impulse in you.
Yeah.
You would be you'd be on either end of, you'd be on the artist end of what you do. So that's good though, and because what you do is so satisfying, and at least I'm,
Hmm.
projecting that out from how I would feel. That just seems like such a wonderful
Hmm.
place to be in doing, and it's so creative. So here's
Yeah,
here's here's to your
definitely writing.
success. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, writing about art, curating art, that's kind of where my I guess my creativity will come out.
Hmm.
Less so in a traditional medium, but
Yeah.
I do feel really lucky that this is what I get to do. I'm just an art nerd at heart, so
Yeah.
to get to do this every day is really great. So thank you for that.
Of course. And what you do is integral and essential to art. You are
Mhm.
part of the body of art, if you want to put that analogy out, the structure of how art moves, and all of that, and
Mhm.
how it is acquired, appreciated, curated, collected, and all that. So yeah, it's essential what you do. So in no way does your non-participation in the generation of art trivialize, the magnificence of the of what you do. So, but yeah, let's if you're up for it, we'll give this one time to blossom and do its thing in the world,
Yeah,
and then we'll
absolutely.
bring you back, and because like I said, we could dig down into some other stuff. Oh my gosh, movies and art. Like I
Yeah.
don't know if that's something you like, but it was like there's a bunch of
Hmm.
that stuff out there, so we could maybe some other time. But we had talked about earlier, maybe things that we could address in another conversation. So if I come back into focus there, let's focus on that. But I think, like I said, Catie, I think we had a lot of terrain covered in this conversation that our audience
Yeah.
can appreciate. So I want to thank you very much for your time, though, and for coming on and sharing your story, your experience, and what you're doing with us. I love creativity, and I think I said it, I try to dabble in ideas around philosophy and stuff like to my
Hmm.
capacity. But I think aesthetics is a branch of philosophy that needs to be woven back into all that seriousness and analytic yada
Yeah,
yada. It's like we need to stop and just chill out a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely.
take a break, go enjoy, walk in a gallery or something. And
Exactly. Enjoy some art, enjoy some flowers, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think having beauty in your life is essential. And thank you so much for having me. This has
yeah,
been such a pleasure and so nice to get to chatting with you and to meet you and think about these big ideas. So I
yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely. I have one funny little anecdote. Years and years ago, I
Sure.
was this is the same time I was going to the Prado and the Louvre and things like that. And I was on a backpacking trip around Europe, and I met a woman
Mhm.
from Denmark, Sweden, somewhere in Scandinavia, my
Okay.
age, and this was in the mid '90s. And I could tell she didn't like Americans very much. She was very pleasant to me, but she's just very spiteful of Americans. And I said something one time, and I called our art museums galleries. So there's a gallery of modern art. It's an
Mhm.
informal, colloquial, perhaps, term that we use. And she corrected me because we were in Spain at the time, and she says they are not galleries; they are art museums. And I thought, Well, no, call, because I referenced one of the galleries in Washington, and that's our
Hmm.
informal. But it was so cute because she just like again there was this underlying layer of contempt for my being an American there,
Yeah.
and I'm not being sensitive. I mean, she made a lot of other statements that night because it was such an international night. We were in a train car together, and I think I shared a cochette with
Hmm.
her. So we were out drinking, and there was a family or there was a couple from like Bolivia. There was a Luxembourg man who was just absolutely amazing. He was a photographer and a businessman, and he would photograph train stations. And he and I made one of those 24-hour friendships where you get, really close talk, you share a lot of ideas, and then you don't see each other ever
Hmm.
again. And she was in that realm too. And there was somebody from Portugal, and she was from Scandinavia, and we all just sat and talked and just shared these
Yeah.
really great ideas. But like I said, she and I cornered each other for a few minutes, and we were going back and forth. And I could just tell, but she was very sweet, very polite person. But I could just tell there was a little under. But she corrected me on the galleries thing, and I'm like, hey, that's
That's
cool.
too funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just like, you peasant American. Your country's only existed,
Oh my
and she even
goodness.
said that too. She's like, your country is so new. It's only existed for 400 and something years. And I'm like, and we have a rich history. And I'm like, yes, that's the case. We are your
Yeah.
arrogant punk teenagers over across the pond. We are derived of you. Yes, I get that. But so what?
Hmm. Yeah.
We're doing our thing, and don't
And we're rolling with it.
don't rain on it. Yeah, don't rain on it.
Yeah.
But she was a very good person. I could tell that she was trying to get a couple of digs. But that was the funny, I guess, funny story about difference between museum and gallery and all these things, the
Yeah.
nomenclature and all that. So anyway, well, maybe we'll end with that. But anyway, Catie, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
I will say goodbye to you after we're done with record. YouTube audience, I will have lots of links and information for Satsuma and some of the things we talked about. I'll have the Hagia Sophia article down there to access if it whetted your curiosity. So we'll have all of that available too. But like I said, any socials, any means of outreach to get a hold of Catie, I will have that available in the description field. So once again, Catie, thank you so much. It's been a
Yes.
pleasure.
And thank you, Justin. I appreciate
Abs
it.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure. So let me stop recording and then we'll say goodbye to each other. Bye, YouTube people.